Chapter 1: The Arrival. Ethan had never imagined that the quiet town of Silverwood would become his home. The small town, tucked away in the heart of the dense forest, was a far cry from the bustling city life he was used to. But after the mysterious deaths of his parents in a tragic accident that authorities had never fully explained, Ethan found himself with no choice but to leave behind the life he knew and start anew. Arriving on a dreary, overcast afternoon, Silverwood felt like a place frozen in time. The streets were narrow, lined with cobblestone, and the houses stood like old sentinels, weathered but stubbornly intact. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Despite the picturesque appearance of the place, there was something unsettling about it. Ethan rented a small cottage on the edge of town. It was simple, with peeling paint and an overgrown garden, but it was a fresh start, a way to escape the suffocating memories of the past. The cottage was surrounded by the looming presence of Silverwood Forest, a vast expanse of trees that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The locals never talked much about the forest, but Ethan could sense their wariness whenever it was mentioned. Over the first few days, Ethan tried to settle into the rhythm of small-town life. He wandered through the town's marketplace, bought groceries, and spent his evenings alone, reflecting on his life and the accident that had taken everything from him. Despite his best efforts to integrate, he couldn't shake the feeling that the town itself was watching him, waiting for something. One afternoon, as Ethan walked through the town square, he overheard an old man telling a story to a group of children. The man's voice was low and grave, and though the children hung on every word, there was an underlying sense of fear in their eyes. "It's the curse of the woods," the man said, his tone chilling. "Silverwood Forest isn't just trees and shadows. It's a place of darkness, where the old spirits still roam. And if you wander too far, you may never come back." Ethan's curiosity piqued. He had heard whispers of a curse in Silverwood, but it always seemed like nothing more than superstition. The townspeople spoke of it in hushed tones, as if talking too much about the forest could awaken something ancient and dangerous. On his third evening, Ethan decided to take a walk into the forest. He had always been someone who needed to understand things, who needed to know the truth behind rumors and fears. The idea that something could live within the woods, something otherworldly, sparked an inexplicable connection deep inside him. As he crossed the edge of the town and ventured toward the trees, a chill ran down his spine. The air grew thicker, and the sunlight began to dim as the canopy of trees above blocked out much of the light. It was as though he had stepped into another world. The rustling of leaves seemed almost deliberate, as if the forest was alive, watching him. Just as he was about to step deeper into the woods, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You shouldn't go in there." Ethan turned to find a young woman standing a few feet away from him, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She was dressed in simple clothes, a flannel shirt and jeans, but there was something striking about her presence. She stood with an air of quiet authority, her gaze sharp and intense. "I'm sorry," Ethan asked, taken aback by her sudden appearance. "You shouldn't go into Silverwood Forest," she repeated, her voice low but firm. "Bad things happen to those who wander too far. The forest is cursed. People disappear in there. Some say it's the wolves, others say it's something darker, but either way, it's not safe." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me you believe in the curse?" The woman nodded, her expression serious. "I'm Lila, by the way. And yes, I believe in it. My family's been here for generations, and we know better than to mess with things we don't understand." She paused, studying him closely. "Look, I'm not trying to scare you, but you're new here. You don't know what's out there. The forest has its own rules, and if you don't follow them, you might never come back." Ethan felt a strange mixture of skepticism and intrigue. Lila's warnings, though chilling, only seemed to deepen his curiosity. There was something in the way she spoke, so earnestly, so convinced, that made him question what he thought he knew about the world. Was there truth to the stories? Was there something lurking in the forest that the townspeople were too afraid to talk about? "Thanks for the warning," Ethan said, though he wasn't sure he believed her. Still, he couldn't help but feel that the forest held the answers he was looking for. The connection was too strong to ignore. Lila gave him a cautious look, then turned to walk away. "Just be careful," she called over her shoulder. "Silverwood has its secrets, and not all of them are meant to be found." As she disappeared into the shadows of the town, Ethan stood there, staring at the darkened path leading into the forest. His heart raced with a mix of anticipation and fear. The town's curse might be nothing more than an old legend, but something told him that in Silverwood, the truth was far stranger than fiction. And he was determined to uncover it. Chapter 2. The First Transformation. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The warnings about Silverwood Forest, the strange looks from the townspeople, and Lila's cryptic words kept circling in his mind. But despite it all, his curiosity was stronger than his fear. The pull to understand what lay within the woods was irresistible. The night of the full moon arrived, casting an eerie light over Silverwood. Ethan had been trying to push the thoughts of the forest out of his head, but something felt different about this night. It wasn't just the moon that felt unnatural. It was as though the entire town was holding its breath. He could feel the energy in the air shift, thick and oppressive, like something was waiting to happen. After dinner, with the sky still tinged in twilight, Ethan made up his mind. He would go into the forest tonight, just for a walk, he told himself. He would see for himself what Lila and the townspeople were so afraid of. The darkness of the woods seemed to whisper his name, urging him forward. He grabbed his jacket, and without telling anyone, he left the cottage. The path that led into Silverwood Forest was winding, overgrown with tangled vines and thick underbrush. Ethan's footsteps were muffled by the soft carpet of leaves beneath his boots, but the air was alive with the hum of night creatures, the rustling of leaves, distant animal calls, and the sound of wind moving through the trees. It was a symphony of nature, yet there was something unsettling about it. The moon above, glowing in its full, silvery brilliance, seemed too bright. Ethan squinted, trying to focus, but the world around him felt altered, as if the very forest itself was changing in front of his eyes. Shadows in the trees seemed to stretch unnaturally long, flickering as if they were alive. As he ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew thicker, almost suffocating. The air was cool and damp, and the further he walked, the quieter everything became. The usual sounds of night, crickets chirping, animals scurrying, faded away. Even the wind stopped whispering through the branches. Then he felt it. A sudden sharp pang in his chest, followed by a burning sensation that spread through his veins. Ethan stumbled and gripped a nearby tree for support, his breath coming in short gasps. It wasn't just physical. His whole body felt like it was tearing apart from the inside. His heart raced as if it were about to explode. The strange pressure inside him built and built, an unbearable force pushing against his skin. He staggered forward, his mind swirling in confusion. What was happening to him? He had been fine just moments ago. Was it the forest? Was it the curse? A strange sound escaped his throat, a growl, but not one of his making. It was guttural, deep, and primal. He froze. The growl seemed to echo in the stillness of the forest, reverberating through the trees. The sound wasn't just coming from his mouth. It was as if something inside of him was demanding to be released. Ethan gritted his teeth, trying to fight it. He didn't know what was happening, but he wasn't going to give in. He had to get back to the cottage. But the pain intensified, shooting through his limbs, and before he could take another step, the transformation began. It wasn't like anything he'd ever experienced before. His bones cracked and shifted, muscles bulging beneath his skin, stretching and contorting in ways that felt completely alien. He could feel his senses sharpening. The air grew suddenly clearer, the smell of pine and damp earth filling his nostrils. His hearing became sharper. Every rustle of a leaf, every scurry of a small animal was amplified, echoing in his mind. His skin rippled, pulling tight as it thickened with fur. His hands turning into clawed paws. Panic surged through him. He tried to scream, to call for help, but the sound that left his mouth was no longer human. It was a howl, a raw, wild sound that vibrated through his chest. With a final, wrenching pain, Ethan collapsed to the forest floor. He could feel his humanity slipping away, his thoughts fading as the beast inside him fully took control. His vision blurred, but what he could see was sharper, darker. The world around him looked different now, strange and frightening. The forest wasn't just a collection of trees and underbrush. It was alive, and it was waiting. He tried to hold on to his consciousness, to fight the beast within, but the more he struggled, the stronger the animal side of him became. His thoughts were clouded with a hunger that wasn't his own. A thirst for the wild, for the hunt, for blood. Suddenly, a noise broke through his dazed state, the snap of a twig, a rustle in the underbrush. He whipped his head toward the sound, his senses hyper-aware. Through the trees he spotted a figure, a deer grazing quietly. The animal was unaware of the predator watching it from the shadows. Ethan's instincts kicked in. His body moved of its own accord, and before he knew it, he was crouching low to the ground, ready to pounce. His claws flexed, and the hunger surged inside him, stronger than his will to resist. But in that moment of clarity, something inside of him snapped. A voice, a faint echo of his own mind, screamed at him to stop, to not give in, to not become the monster he was afraid of. With every ounce of his remaining humanity, Ethan fought back, pushing the wolf's instincts to the side. He turned and ran, tearing through the forest with all the strength his new form could muster. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to escape before he lost himself completely. Eventually, the fog of transformation lifted, and Ethan stumbled out of the forest, breathless and trembling. He was no longer fully a wolf, but the remnants of the transformation lingered in his body. His senses still heightened, his heart still pounding in his chest. He collapsed at the edge of the woods, exhausted and terrified. It was then that the truth hit him with full force. The curse was real, and he had become part of it. Chapter 3: Secrets of the Curse. Ethan woke up the next morning, sprawled on the ground at the edge of Silverwood Forest, the scent of the woods still clinging to his clothes, his skin. He felt disoriented, groggy, as though he hadn't slept in days, yet his body was strangely energized. Every part of him felt alive, pulsing with heightened senses. He could hear the rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant chirp of a bird, the faint footsteps of someone walking nearby. Every detail was sharper than it had ever been before. It had happened. The transformation. He was no longer just a man. He had become something else, something dark, something that belonged to the curse he had once dismissed as superstition. The events of the previous night rushed back to him, and he immediately sat up, scanning his surroundings. The pain was gone, but it was replaced by an odd feeling, like his body was not entirely his own. His heart was still pounding, his breath shallow as he struggled to comprehend what had happened. He had never believed in magic, in curses or werewolves. But this was beyond anything logical. Felt real. He had felt his bones stretch, his muscles twist, his very essence changing. And now, his reflection in the nearby pond only confirmed it. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. He looked human, but there was a wildness in his gaze, a feral gleam that hadn't been there before. As he stood shakily and tried to gather his bearings, the sound of someone approaching broke his thoughts. It was Lila. She was walking through the forest, her steps careful but confident. Her face was a mix of concern and resignation when she saw him. "Ethan," she said quietly, her voice steady but with a hint of fear beneath it. "I knew you'd come. I was waiting for you." Ethan didn't know what to say. He didn't even know where to begin. The night felt like a blur, a nightmare. Was he dreaming? Could something like this actually happen to someone? Werewolves. He was supposed to be human, not a creature of myth. But Lila didn't wait for him to speak. She walked over to him and without any hesitation she said, "We need to talk. About the curse." Ethan blinked, still trying to grasp what was happening. "The curse? You mean the thing you warned me about? I don't know what's going on. I don't." He cut himself off, his voice breaking as panic rose in his chest. "What is this? Why did this happen to me?" Lila took a deep breath, her eyes softening with sympathy, but there was also a hardened resolve in them. "You're not the first person this has happened to, Ethan. The curse of Silverwood runs deep, deeper than you can imagine. And you've just become part of it." She paused, waiting for him to process her words before she continued. "The curse doesn't just affect anyone. It's passed through bloodlines. Those who are marked by the curse, those who are bitten or born with the blood of the wolves, become part of something much older than any of us. The transformation you experienced last night wasn't just a random event. It was the curse awakening within you." Ethan swallowed hard. "But why me? Why did this happen to me?" Lila's expression darkened, and she stepped closer to him. "I don't know. The curse can be random sometimes. Maybe it's the bloodline you come from. Maybe it's fate. But what I do know is that once the curse takes hold, it doesn't let go. Not without a fight." She hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether or not to tell him more. Then with a deep sigh she spoke again. "The Silverwood Curse has been around for centuries. It all started with an ancient pack of wolves who were cursed by a powerful sorcerer. In exchange for their strength, The wolves were forced to live under the moon's sway, forever bound to the forest. The curse was passed down through generations, and now it affects anyone who is tied to the bloodline. Some say the forest itself is alive, that it feeds off the curse. That's why the people of Silverwood avoid it. It's not just a forest, it's a prison. And once you're part of it, there's no escaping. Ethan absorbed the information in stunned silence. The weight of what she was saying was overwhelming. His mind struggled to piece everything together. The curse, the bloodline, the transformation, it was too much. But there has to be a way to undo it, right? Ethan asked, his voice raw with desperation. There has to be something I can do. Lila looked at him with a mixture of pity and understanding. I'm not going to lie to you, Ethan. There isn't an easy answer. The only way to truly break the curse is through blood. A sacrifice. A powerful werewolf's blood, to be exact. And even then it's not guaranteed. The forest doesn't give up its hold easily. Ethan's chest tightened. So, you're telling me I'm stuck like this? That I'll never be human again? Lila shook her head. Not exactly. There are ways to control it, but they require time, patience, and discipline. And even then, there's always the risk of losing control. The moon, especially the full moon, makes everything worse. That's when the beast inside you is strongest. The longer you fight it, the more dangerous it becomes. Ethan felt the weight of her words, the gravity of his situation pressing down on him. His thoughts were clouded with the image of the wolf inside him, the one he could feel stirring in the back of his mind, waiting to take over again. The primal hunger, the urge to run, to hunt. He had tasted it just once, and it had been more than enough to terrify him. But Lila wasn't done. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You're not alone in this, Ethan. There are others like you. Others who've been cursed, who've learned to control the beast. But there's also something you need to know. There are hunters in Silverwood. Humans just like Marcus who want to destroy all werewolves. They won't stop until they kill every last one. Ethan stiffened at the mention of Marcus, the hunter he had seen in the town. And what do you want me to do about it? Lila's eyes hardened. You're going to have to make a choice, Ethan. The curse can be controlled, but only if you're willing to fight. You can choose to embrace the wolf inside you, or you can fight against it. But know this, Marcus and the others won't stop. They're hunting us. And if they find out about you... Ethan clenched his fists. The weight of the decision before him settled over him like a shadow. He had to choose. Embrace the wolf or fight to stay human. But either way, the curse would not let him go without a fight. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Mark. Ethan had spent the last few days in a haze. The full moon had passed, but the after-effects of his transformation were still lingering. His body felt different, stronger, faster, but also unpredictable. The wolf inside him wasn't just a part of the curse. It was a presence, a force he could feel at the edges of his mind. Sometimes it whispered to him, urging him to embrace the wild, to stop fighting. And every time he gave in, even for a moment, the hunger grew. Lila had been training him, teaching him how to manage the urges, how to control the beast within. She had shown him how to shift at will, to harness the power of the wolf without completely losing himself. But there was still so much he didn't understand, about the curse, the forest, and the dark secrets that lay beneath Silverwood. One evening, after yet another exhausting session in the woods, Ethan sat on the porch of his cottage, staring out into the dark forest. He had begun to feel like he didn't belong anywhere anymore. Not in Silverwood, not in the human world. The curse had taken away any sense of normalcy, replacing it with a constant, gnawing hunger and an ever-present sense of danger. That's when he heard it, the faintest rustling, followed by a shadow moving swiftly across the trees. He stiffened, his instincts kicking in. The forest had always been alive with sounds, but this one was different. This wasn't the usual nocturnal creatures or the wind swaying the branches. This was something or someone following him. Without thinking, Ethan stood and moved into the shadows, his body shifting to blend with the night. His heightened senses picked up every detail. The scent of pine, the distant sound of rushing water, and the faintest trace of sweat and gunpowder. Hunters. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Marcus. Lila had warned him about the hunters, but he hadn't taken it seriously. Not until now. Ethan crept silently toward the forest's edge, his muscles coiled and ready to spring. The hunter wasn't far behind, his footsteps growing louder as he drew nearer. Ethan's heart beat faster. Should he confront him? Could he outrun him? His eyes narrowed as he spotted a figure moving through the trees. A tall, lean man, clad in dark clothing, carrying a rifle across his back. It was Marcus, Ethan was sure of it. Ethan hesitated. The urge to attack, to take the man down before he could strike, burned in his chest. But something held him back. The wolf wanted to tear through the hunter's flesh, but Ethan fought the impulse. He couldn't lose control. Not yet. Just as he was about to retreat into the woods and circle around, Marcus froze, his gaze darting across the trees. Ethan instinctively ducked behind a large oak, his breath shallow and slow, trying to mask his scent. For a moment everything was still. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Then Marcus spoke, his voice low and calculating. "I know you're out there, Wolf." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, yet Marcus had sensed him. How? How did he know? Marcus turned toward the edge of the forest, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. "I've been hunting your kind for years," he continued, his voice growing colder. "You think you can hide in the shadows, but I can smell you. I can feel you." Ethan's pulse raced. How much did Marcus know? Had he seen his transformation? Did the hunter know about the curse? Marcus slowly unslung the rifle from his back, his movements deliberate. The tension in the air was palpable, the silence almost deafening. Ethan's mind raced. He had to act quickly, but he couldn't reveal himself yet. Not without more information. "You think you can just walk away from this, don't you?" Marcus muttered under his breath, scanning the trees one more time. "But I've marked you, Ethan. You can't run from me. Not anymore." The word struck him like a blow. Marked. Ethan's mind flashed back to the first time he'd seen Marcus, when he'd been watching him from afar in the marketplace. Marcus had always been there, lurking, watching, as if waiting for something. But now Ethan understood. He wasn't just a hunter. He had been tracking him specifically. The curse had made Ethan a target. Before he could process the meaning of Marcus's words, the hunter stepped forward, his rifle aimed directly toward the woods, toward the exact spot where Ethan was hiding. "I've been waiting for this," Marcus said softly, as if to himself. "The curse is coming to an end. All the werewolves in Silverwood. I'm going to wipe them out." Silverwood's curse, Ethan realized, wasn't just a curse. It was a battle, one that had been raging for centuries, between the wolves of the forest and the humans who sought to eradicate them. And now he was in the middle of it. Before Marcus could take another step, Ethan moved. He dashed into the woods, his senses heightened and his body moving with speed he had never known. His limbs felt like they were part of the very wind, his feet barely touching the ground as he sprinted through the trees. The wolf inside him surged to the forefront, its power urging him forward, its instincts taking control. Marcus shouted something, but it was lost in the wind. Ethan didn't care. He couldn't be caught. Not now. He dove deeper into the forest, the sound of Marcus's footsteps echoing behind him. But he had a lead. He was faster, stronger. He had the forest on his side. As Ethan sprinted through the dense thicket, he realized that the more he ran, the more he understood. The forest wasn't just a place of shadows. It was alive, an ancient part of the curse. It knew him. It could protect him, could hide him. The trees seemed to open up ahead, and Ethan found himself in a clearing. In the center of it stood a large, gnarled tree, its bark blackened and twisted. It pulsed with an unnatural energy. Ethan approached it cautiously, feeling the energy flow from the ground into his body. He had seen this tree before. Lila had told him about it. The heart of Silverwood. The tree was a source of power, a link to the ancient magic of the curse. Suddenly, a rustle behind him interrupted his thoughts. Marcus had caught up. "Do you really think you can hide from me, Wolf?" Marcus's voice was dripping with disdain. He raised his rifle again, aiming straight for Ethan's heart. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest, but he didn't flinch. He had no choice now. He was in the clearing. The magic was already waking up inside him. If he was going to survive this, he had to take a stand. And that's when he realized the curse wasn't just about survival. It was about embracing it. Chapter 5. The Heart of Silverwood. Ethan's heart was pounding in his chest, his breath coming in quick, shallow bursts as he faced Marcus in the clearing. The hunter's rifle was aimed directly at him, its cold metal barrel gleaming under the pale moonlight. The hunter's expression was calm, calculated, almost as if he had anticipated this moment for years. Ethan, on the other hand, was on edge, the wolf inside him snarling with every passing second, its instincts screaming at him to run, to fight. But Ethan didn't move. He stood there, rooted to the spot, as the wind swirled around him, tugging at his hair and clothes. The heart of Silverwood, the ancient, gnarled tree that stood before him, hummed with a strange energy. It felt like the very air was charged, as if the forest itself was watching him, waiting for him to make his choice. The energy emanating from the tree seemed to seep into him, pulling him closer. There was a connection there, something deep and primal. "Don't make me do this, Ethan," Marcus said, his voice cold but with a hint of finality. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. The curse, this is just the beginning. You're either with us or against us. And I can't let you get in the way of what we're trying to do here." Ethan's mind raced. He could feel the hunter's cold gaze on him, but it wasn't just the man he had to worry about. It was what the hunter represented, everything the people of Silverwood feared. The curse, the werewolves, the hunters, the long-standing war between the two sides. But more than that, Ethan knew he couldn't just back down. He wasn't the same person he had been before the transformation. He wasn't just human anymore. The wolf was a part of him now. and it was starting to speak louder than the doubts that still lingered in his mind. "I'm not going to let you destroy everything," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. It was a warning. But Marcus didn't seem fazed. "You don't understand," Marcus replied, his grip tightening on the rifle. "The curse is a plague. It's spreading, infecting this town, this forest. It has to end. You're just one more victim. I'll end it before it takes hold of anyone else." Ethan clenched his fists. The wolf was pushing against the surface of his control, clawing at his insides, urging him to fight. He could feel the primal energy of the curse coursing through him. His vision sharpened, and the air around him grew thick with the scent of the hunter's fear and the earth beneath his feet. The moonlight bathed the clearing in a silvery glow, casting long shadows across the ground. The heart of Silverwood pulsed again, and with it, Ethan felt a wave of power rush through him. The tree was no longer just a symbol of the curse. It was a focal point, a source of ancient magic, perhaps even a key to unlocking his full potential. But he didn't know how to access it. Not yet. Marcus took another step forward, aiming his rifle once more. His voice was softer now, but there was a menacing edge to it. "This is your last chance, Ethan. Stand down and I'll make it quick. Resist, and you'll regret it." For a heartbeat, Ethan considered running. He had the speed, the agility, and the instincts of a wolf now. He could escape, maybe even get back to the safety of the cottage. But that wasn't what he wanted. He couldn't run anymore. The curse was a part of him, and this fight, this war, had already begun. He stepped forward, feeling the wolf grow stronger within him. The air around him seemed to hum as he approached the heart of Silverwood. The tree's power surged into him, filling his veins with an energy he couldn't fully control. The voice of the wolf was loud now, overpowering. It was almost like the forest itself was calling to him, urging him to take his place as its protector. "Leave," Ethan growled, his voice becoming guttural as his transformation began once again. His bones cracked and reshaped. His muscles bulged beneath his skin. His senses sharpened to a level he couldn't have imagined before. The world around him seemed to slow, the moonlight casting everything in a haunting glow. Marcus took a step back, his eyes widening in shock as Ethan's body morphed before him. The rifle was still pointed at Ethan, but the hunter was no longer in control. The fear was evident in his face, and for the first time, Ethan realized that he was the predator now. "What the hell are you?" Marcus stammered, his voice betraying his disbelief. Ethan's transformation wasn't as complete as it had been during the full moon, but he was still powerful. His senses were heightened, his speed unmatched. His claws extended, and his teeth elongated into sharp, deadly points. He let out a low, menacing growl, warning Marcus to stay back. "I said leave," Ethan repeated, the words more growl than speech. Marcus hesitated for only a moment longer before he raised the rifle, ready to fire. But Ethan was faster. With a burst of speed, he leaped forward, knocking the rifle from Marcus's hands and sending it skittering across the ground. The hunter tried to draw a knife from his belt, but before he could even make a move, Ethan swiped his claws across Marcus's chest, sending the man sprawling backwards into the dirt. Marcus gasped for breath, his eyes wide with fear as he struggled to get up. The wolf inside Ethan was too strong now, its hunger growing. The primal instinct to kill, to protect, flooded his mind. but something stopped him. Voice. Lila's voice. Ethan, don't. You're not like him. Ethan paused, his eyes narrowing. His muscles still coiled, his claws extended, but the memory of Lila's words grounded him. He wasn't a monster. Not yet. He stepped back, his transformation starting to recede as he fought to maintain control. Marcus, still on the ground, was shaking, his face pale as he stared at the creature that had once been Ethan. You don't have to do this, Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with fear. You can still be human. Don't let the curse consume you. Ethan's gaze hardened. I'm not you, Marcus. And I'm not going to let you destroy everything for your crusade. This is my fight now. And you're not part of it. With that, Ethan turned his back on the hunter and walked toward the heart of Silverwood. The power from the tree pulsed through him, settling his nerves, calming the wolf within for now. Marcus lay in the clearing, still trembling, but Ethan didn't look back. The path ahead was uncertain, and the war between humans and werewolves was only just beginning. But one thing was clear now. Ethan had chosen his side. And it wasn't with the hunters. Chapter 6. A Wolf's Bond. Ethan left the clearing with a heavy heart. His mind was still buzzing from the encounter with Marcus. His pulse was racing, the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but there was something else, something darker. The wolf within him was hungry. It always was. He could feel it scratching at the edges of his consciousness, urging him to release it fully, to let the animal instincts take over. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not like that. As he walked through the dense woods, the full weight of his situation pressed on him. The curse had not just changed his body, it had changed his mind, his soul. The more he used the power, the more difficult it became to keep the wolf at bay. It wasn't just about strength or speed. It was about something deeper, something wild. The wolf wasn't a beast that could be controlled by mere willpower. It was a force that craved freedom, chaos. It had always been within him, dormant, but now it was awake, louder, more insistent. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of soft footsteps behind him. He turned, his heightened senses immediately recognizing the presence before his eyes even made contact. Layla. Her face was unreadable as she approached him, her steps slow and deliberate. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed with concern, but also something else. Relief. Ethan, she said quietly, her voice soft but filled with an unspoken understanding. Are you all right? Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't all right. None of this was all right. He had almost killed Marcus, and for what? To protect a cursed forest that had taken everything from him. No, he finally said, shaking his head. I'm not even sure who I am anymore. Lila nodded slowly, as if she expected his response. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face, sensing his turmoil. You're still you, Ethan. But the curse, it's a part of you now. The wolf, the bloodline. You can't fight it forever. Ethan clenched his fists at his sides, feeling the restless energy coursing through him. I know it's a part of me, he said bitterly. But what if it takes over? What if I can't control it? What if I lose myself? I've already come so close to hurting people. I nearly killed Marcus. Hell, I wanted to. Lila's expression softened, and she took a step closer to him, her hand reaching out to rest gently on his shoulder. I know the feeling, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know it better than anyone. I've been where you are. And I've seen others who were lost to the wolf. But you're not lost, Ethan. Not yet. Ethan met her gaze, searching for some semblance of reassurance in her words. How can you be so sure? Lila's lips parted, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimpse of something vulnerable in her eyes. Because I've been through it. The bond, the transformation. It's a struggle, but there's a way to survive it. We can learn to control it. Together. The weight of her words settled on him. Heavy yet strangely comforting. Together. It felt like a lifeline in the middle of the chaos, a thread that connected him to something beyond the curse itself. But how? Ethan asked, the desperation creeping into his voice. How do I control it? The wolf is always there, always pushing at the surface. What if I can't hold it back? Lila's gaze softened, and she took another step closer. Her voice was steady as she spoke, filled with quiet conviction. There's something you need to understand, Ethan. The curse, it's not just about power. It's about the bond between you and the wolf. It's ancient, and it's tied to the forest itself. The heart of Silverwood, the tree you saw earlier. It's a focal point. It holds the essence of the curse. But the bond you share with the wolf, that's personal. She paused, her eyes locking with his as she continued. To control the curse, you need to embrace that bond. You can't fight it and you can't ignore it. The more you fight it, the stronger the wolf will get. But if you learn to connect with it, to understand it, then you'll find a balance. That's the key. And you're not alone in this, Ethan. I'll help you. Ethan stared at her, feeling a flicker of hope deep within him. Could it really be that simple? Could he really learn to coexist with the wolf instead of fighting it every step of the way? I've been training with you because I believe in you, Lila continued, her voice calm but firm. But this isn't just about training. It's about trust. Trust in yourself, trust in the wolf, and trust in the bond between us. The last words hung in the air for a moment, and Ethan felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere, a subtle change that went deeper than the physical. There was something unspoken between them now, something that went beyond just mentor and student. Lila was more than just a guide. She was the first person who had truly understood what he was going through. She knew the pain, the fear, the urge to be free of the wolf. She knew because she had lived it. For the first time in days, Ethan felt the tightness in his chest ease, if only slightly. He wasn't alone in this fight. But what about Marcus? He asked, breaking the silence. He's not going to stop. He's a hunter, Lila. And he knows about me now. About the curse. Lila's expression hardened, the softness in her eyes replaced with a flicker of anger. Marcus won't stop. He never has. The hunters, they're relentless. They've been trying to wipe out the werewolves for centuries, and they'll keep coming for you. But we are stronger than they think. Ethan frowned. We. Who else is with us? Lila glanced away for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. When she looked back at him, her eyes were filled with a quiet resolve. There are others like us, Ethan. Werewolves who have learned to control the curse, who have embraced the bond. They're out there and they're willing to fight. But they won't come for you unless you're ready. Ethan nodded slowly, a sense of determination growing within him. He had a new purpose now, a new mission. He couldn't keep running from the wolf. He couldn't hide from the curse. He had to face it head-on, learn to control it, and build the strength to fight back against the hunters. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. Lila smiled, her expression softening. "Good. Then it's time for you to learn how to embrace the wolf." Chapter 7. Into the Pack. The days after the conversation with Lila passed in a blur. Ethan spent most of his time training with her in the deep woods, learning to control the shifting process, harnessing the strength of the wolf without losing himself to the animal instincts that lurked just beneath the surface. The training was grueling, but it was necessary. Every time he shifted, he felt the weight of the wolf pushing against him, urging him to let go, to embrace the power. But Lila's guidance was steady, and slowly, he began to gain control. One evening, after a particularly difficult training session, Lila took him to a different part of the forest, a place Ethan had never seen before. The trees were older here, their trunks thick and gnarled, the air cooler, as though the forest itself had taken a deeper, more ancient breath. They reached a clearing that felt different from all the others. The ground was soft underfoot, and there was an almost ethereal glow that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. Ethan could feel the pulse of magic here, stronger than anywhere else in the woods. "Where are we?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet, awed by the strange energy that hummed in the air. Lila didn't answer immediately. She walked forward, her steps measured, until she stopped near the center of the clearing. Slowly, she turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of caution and something deeper, almost as if she were preparing him for something significant. "This," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "is where you will meet the rest of the pack." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The word hit him like a surge of electricity. He'd heard about packs, the groups of werewolves that had learned to live with the curse, that had embraced it and fought alongside it, finding strength in numbers. But he hadn't expected to be introduced to one so soon. "You're ready," Lila continued, her gaze unwavering. "You've learned how to control the wolf, how to fight its urges. Now it's time to learn from those who've mastered it, those who've lived with the curse for longer than you." Ethan opened his mouth to speak but found himself silenced by the weight of her words. He wasn't alone. There were others just like him. Others who understood the battle, the struggle between the man and the wolf, the curse that had transformed their lives. It was both terrifying and reassuring to think about what lay ahead. What would the pack be like? Lila gestured for him to follow as she moved toward the heart of the clearing, where a circle of ancient stones stood. They were worn by time, their surfaces etched with symbols Ethan didn't recognize. The stones stood like silent sentinels, guarding the center of this sacred space. As they approached, the air seemed to shift again, as though something powerful was awakening. Lila stopped just before the stones and turned to Ethan. "The pack lives in the heart of this forest," she said, her voice now taking on a more solemn tone. "They're a small group, but they are strong. Each of them has gone through what you've experienced, through the struggle, the fear, the loss. But they've also learned something that few ever do, to live in harmony with the wolf inside them." Before Ethan could respond, he heard a rustling in the trees behind them. He tensed, instinctively preparing to defend himself, but Lila held up a hand, signaling for him to stay calm. Out of the shadows stepped a figure, a tall, muscular man with dark, untamed hair and eyes that seemed to gleam with an ancient knowledge. His presence was commanding, and though he wore simple clothing, there was something wild about him, as though he was one with the forest itself. "Lila," the man said, his voice deep and smooth, carrying the weight of authority. He looked at Ethan with a piercing gaze, his eyes taking in every detail of the young man standing before him. "Is this him?" he asked, his tone almost curious. "This is Ethan," Lila replied, her voice calm but filled with respect. "He's ready." The man studied Ethan for a moment, his gaze lingering on him like a silent test. Then, without a word, he nodded. "Come. Follow me." Ethan exchanged a glance with Lila, who gave him an encouraging nod. He took a deep breath and followed the man into the deeper woods. As they walked, the forest seemed to change around them. The trees grew denser, the air heavier with magic. Ethan could feel the pulse of the land beneath his feet, the heartbeat of the forest. It was as though the forest was alive, aware of him, watching him, just as he was beginning to understand it. After a few minutes of walking, they reached a small, hidden settlement nestled between the trees. The buildings were simple, constructed from wood and stone, but there was a sense of ancient wisdom in the design. The settlement had an almost otherworldly feel, as though it had existed for centuries, untouched by the outside world. As they entered, Ethan noticed the people, werewolves just like him. They moved with an easy grace, their eyes sharp, their movements confident, as though they had long since come to terms with their transformations. The man led them to the center of the settlement, where a fire burned brightly in the center of a large stone circle. Several others were gathered around the fire, 2 women, one older and one younger, both with the same wild eyes, and another man, older than the first, with a graying beard and a quiet, steady presence. They all looked up as Lila and Ethan approached, their expressions unreadable. "This is Ethan," the man introduced, his deep voice carrying authority. "He's here to join us." The others studied Ethan for a long moment, their gazes weighing him, measuring him, before they nodded, acknowledging his presence. It was the older woman who spoke first, her voice soft yet firm. "Lila says you're ready," she said, her eyes piercing through him. "But readiness doesn't mean strength. It means knowing yourself and knowing the wolf inside you. Do you understand?" Ethan hesitated, but then nodded. "I think I'm starting to." The older woman's lips twitched in a small smile. "Good. Because the path you're about to walk won't be easy. You'll face things you can't even begin to imagine. But you will never be alone." The younger woman, with her sharp, keen eyes, spoke next, her tone full of challenge. "We'll see if you really belong here. The pack doesn't just accept anyone. You'll have to prove you're one of us." Ethan felt a flicker of doubt rise within him, but he pushed it down. This was it. This was the next step in his journey, the next chapter in his fight against the curse. And he couldn't afford to fail. Not now. The older man, the leader of the group, stepped forward and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. His grip was strong, but there was kindness in his eyes. "It's not about strength alone, Ethan. It's about understanding the balance between man and wolf. You'll learn to listen to both." Lila smiled softly, standing at Ethan's side. "You're not alone anymore." And in that moment, surrounded by the pack, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Chapter 8: Trials of the Wolf. Ethan spent the following weeks living among the pack, learning from them in ways he never imagined possible. The days blurred together in a haze of training, meditations, and exercises designed to strengthen both his human and wolf sides. Each trial was designed to push him further, to test his limits, and force him to face the truth about himself. The pack was small but tightly knit. They were a family, bound not just by the curse but by their shared history and experiences. And while Ethan had felt isolated before, here in the heart of Silverwood, he was slowly beginning to feel like he belonged. The pack was led by Thorn, the tall, dark-haired man who had first brought Ethan to the settlement. He was older than the others, with an air of authority that Ethan couldn't help but respect. Thorn's leadership was quiet, subtle, but there was no mistaking that he was the anchor of the group. He had lived with the curse the longest, and his wisdom was apparent in every word he spoke. But the pack wasn't just made up of strong leaders. There was Mara, the younger woman with sharp eyes, who constantly challenged Ethan. Her quick wit and sharp tongue were as fierce as the wolf inside her. Then there was Kara, the older woman, who had seen more than her fair share of pain and loss. Her voice was the calm center in the midst of chaos, offering advice when Ethan most needed it. The older man, Cale, was the quiet one, always observing, always calculating. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. For Ethan, the hardest part wasn't the training or the tests. It was the constant battle between the man and the wolf. The more time he spent in the forest, the more the wolf inside him seemed to grow, pushing harder against the edges of his control, urging him to give in to the animal instincts. But the pack was teaching him something invaluable: acceptance. Each night, they would gather around the fire, sharing stories of their pasts, their struggles, and their triumphs. They spoke openly about the curse, how they had learned to live with it, how they had embraced both their human and wolf sides. But they didn't just share wisdom, they shared pain. Each one of them had a story of loss, betrayal, and fear. They had all fought the same fight Ethan now faced. And they had survived. One night, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the trees, Thorn gathered the pack together. Ethan sat on the ground, listening intently, his senses alert. "It's time," Thorn said, his voice steady. Time for Ethan to face his first true test. Ethan felt a tightening in his chest. He had been expecting this moment, but the realization that it had arrived made his heart race. He wasn't ready, not fully. Mara looked at him, her eyes challenging. "Think you're ready to prove yourself, Ethan?" she asked, her voice filled with both a teasing edge and a hint of something deeper, respect. He swallowed hard, standing tall. "I'm ready. I have to be." Thorn nodded, his gaze sharp. "Tonight we're going to take you deeper into the forest, into the heart of Silverwood. You'll face the trial of the wolf." Ethan frowned, unsure of what that meant. "What is that?" "It's simple," Thorn said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "You'll enter the forest alone, and you'll face the wolf inside you. You will not shift unless you choose to. If you fail, if you let the wolf take control, you will be lost to it. You'll never be able to return to the pack." The words were a cold slap in the face. The trial of the wolf was an ancient test, one that each member of the pack had to face when they first joined. It wasn't just about strength. It was about mastering the balance between their human and wolf sides. To shift freely, to control the wolf, was the ultimate test of whether or not they could live with the curse. If they failed, if they let the wolf consume them, they would be lost. No one would be able to save them. "The heart of Silverwood is a place of power," Thorn continued. "It's where the curse began, where your transformation began. You'll have to face the memories, the pain, the rage, and find peace with it. You can't run from it, Ethan. The wolf is a part of you. But you have to learn how to make it yours." Ethan's heart was pounding. The pressure was suffocating, and the fear in his chest was rising like a tide. He could feel the wolf stirring inside him, sensing his fear, feeding off of it. But he knew he couldn't back down now. This was the moment. Lila had prepared him for this, but the truth was, he wasn't sure if he was ready. His training had barely scratched the surface, and the wolf inside him was stronger than ever. How could he possibly face it, let alone master it? "Let's go," Thorn said, his voice steady as he turned to lead the way. The pack followed him silently, and soon they were deep within the forest, walking toward the heart of Silverwood. The trees here were ancient, their branches twisted and gnarled like the fingers of long-forgotten gods. The air felt different here, heavier, charged with energy that hummed through the ground and into his bones. As they approached the center of the forest, the moonlight broke through the canopy, casting a silvery glow over the massive tree at the center of the clearing. The heart of Silverwood was a living monument, its trunk wide and twisted, its roots deep within the earth. Its presence was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The tree seemed to pulse with life, its ancient magic flowing through the land, connecting everything around it. "This is it," Thorn said, his voice low. "This is where you'll face the wolf." Ethan's breath hitched. He could feel the energy of the forest around him, the tension in the air rising as the wolf inside him began to stir. "You have to go alone," Thorn added, his gaze piercing. "We'll be here when you return. But this is your journey." Ethan nodded, his legs heavy with fear but his resolve hardening. "I understand." With one last glance at the pack, he stepped forward, walking toward the massive tree, its roots sprawling like the veins of the earth itself. As he reached the tree, he placed his hand on its bark, feeling a surge of energy course through him. It was ancient and raw, and it felt like the tree was calling to him, welcoming him into its power. "Face the wolf," Thorn's voice echoed from behind him, but Ethan barely heard it. The wolf was already within him, clawing at the edges of his mind, urging him to shift, to let go, to embrace the rage. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and then he let go. Chapter 9. The Heart of the Wolf. Ethan's pulse raced as he stood before the massive tree, the heart of Silverwood. The night air felt charged, thick with energy that seemed to hum through the very soil beneath his feet. He had felt the pull of the forest before, but never like this. There was something different about tonight, something deep and ancient, as if the forest itself had been waiting for him. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, grounding himself, focusing on his heartbeat, his breath, the way the wind whispered through the leaves. But none of that calmed the storm raging inside him. The wolf was awake now, more restless than ever. It sensed the power of this place, and it was hungry. "You are not just a man anymore, Ethan," he whispered to himself, trying to steady his thoughts. "You're both. You have to learn to live with both." But the wolf inside him was relentless. It wanted freedom. It wanted release. It wanted to rip through the world without hesitation, without fear. The first change was subtle. He felt the skin of his fingers tingle, like electricity racing through his veins. It was the same feeling he'd had the first time he shifted, only this time the transformation was more violent. The wolf didn't want to wait. It wanted out now. Ethan staggered, grabbing the bark of the heart of Silverwood for support, but the world around him was already starting to blur. His bones cracked and shifted, and his muscles rippled beneath his skin. He fought it. He had to. He wasn't ready to lose himself to the animal, to let it take control again. But the harder he fought, the more intense the pain became. The wolf was in control, dragging him down into the depths of his instincts. His body contorted, and the world seemed to close in around him as he struggled to hold on to his humanity. In a moment of weakness, he let out a roar, a primal guttural sound that echoed through the clearing. It was the sound of the beast inside him, calling to the forest. And the forest answered. The massive tree in front of him seemed to pulse, its ancient magic surging through the air, feeding into his transformation. The wind picked up, howling through the branches, as if the forest itself was urging him to embrace it, to accept what he was. His vision shifted, everything becoming sharper, clearer. He could smell the earth beneath him, feel the heartbeat of the forest in his chest. The scents of the night were overwhelming, intoxicating. The wolf was in him, but this time it didn't feel like an enemy. It was part of him. Suddenly the world slowed. Ethan's breathing steadied. He could feel the wolf, the power, but now it was calmer. Not a raging force, but something else. Something that understood him, that connected with the forest, with the heartbeat of Silverwood. The wolf was no longer a beast to fight. It was a companion. Ethan opened his eyes, no longer fighting the transformation but allowing it. He looked down at his hands, now large and furred, claws gleaming in the moonlight. His senses were on fire. He could hear the smallest rustle in the bushes, feel the vibrations of the wind in his fur, taste the sweet, earthy air. But it wasn't just the transformation that had changed. It was something deeper. A quiet voice inside him, one that wasn't the wolf but was him, was whispering, "You are in control." The clearing around him was still. The air felt thick with magic, with the weight of the forest's ancient power. But now, instead of feeling like an intruder, Ethan felt as if he was a part of it, an extension of the land itself. The heart of Silverwood wasn't just a tree. It was the connection. It was the source of everything, the origin of the curse, the power, the change. He breathed in deeply, his chest rising and falling with each breath, feeling the pulse of energy flow through him. He had never felt so alive, so whole. Then, a presence broke the silence. A figure stepped into the clearing, emerging from the shadows like a ghost. At first, Ethan thought it was a trick of his heightened senses. But no. There, standing before him, was the face of the pack, Lila. Her eyes were wide, reflecting a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and something deeper that he couldn't quite place. She had been watching him, waiting. "You did it," she said, her voice calm but heavy with emotion. Ethan stood still, his wolf form towering over her. Yet there was a familiarity in her presence that anchored him. The wolf didn't feel threatened by her. It recognized her. She was part of the pack, part of him. Lila stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You've learned to embrace it. To accept the wolf." Ethan's chest rose and fell with each breath. He wanted to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead he nodded. He could feel the bond between them, like an invisible thread connecting them, weaving their fates together. He wasn't alone anymore. He was part of something larger, something stronger. The transformation was complete, but the battle was far from over. He had learned to control the wolf, but now he had to learn to live with it. To balance the man and the beast, to never lose himself completely. "You've passed the trial," Lila continued, her voice gentle. "The pack will accept you now. You've shown that you can control the wolf within." Ethan took another breath, feeling the weight of her words settle on him. He had done it. He had passed the trial of the wolf, not by overpowering the beast inside him, but by understanding it, by accepting it as part of who he was. But there was something more to this trial. Something deeper that he hadn't anticipated. As Lila reached out, her fingers brushing his fur, Ethan felt the connection between them surge. There was a bond between them, something that was more than just the pack. He could feel it in his bones, deep in his heart. "You're not just one of us, Ethan," she said softly. "You're the one we've been waiting for." Ethan looked at her, his mind racing. "What do you mean?" But before Lila could answer, a sound echoed through the woods, a distant, mournful howl. His heart skipped a beat. The howl was familiar. It was Marcus. Chapter 10: The Blood Moon. The howl pierced the night like a blade through the silence, echoing through the trees, sending a ripple of unease through the air. Ethan's heart raced, the wolf inside him stirring once more, sensing the tension, the danger that was coming. The pack had been quiet, living in peace for so long, but now, with that single howl, everything had changed. Lila turned sharply, her eyes narrowing, her expression hardening. "That's Marcus. He's found us." Ethan's chest tightened. Marcus. The name was familiar, but not in the way he wanted it to be. Marcus was one of the pack's greatest enemies. A rogue werewolf who had once been part of Silverwood but had broken away, embracing his animal instincts in a dangerous way. He had become a leader of his own pack of outcasts, people who rejected the balance the Silverwood pack had fought so hard to maintain. And they had been hunting the Silverwood pack for months, seeking to destroy them. "What's he doing here?" Ethan asked, his voice low, the wolf inside him eager to face whatever threat was approaching. Lila's eyes flickered to him, and she shook her head. "He's not here for us, not just for us. He's here for you, Ethan." His stomach twisted. "Me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why?" Lila didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to Thorn, who had been standing silently in the background, observing the situation. His face was set in a grim expression, but his eyes betrayed a deep, simmering anger. "We've kept this from you for a reason," Thorn said, his voice low but firm. "But now that the trial is over, it's time you knew the truth." Ethan's mind raced. The truth. What truth? He felt like he had just come to terms with one aspect of his life. The wolf, the curse, the pack. But now a new layer of fear began to settle in. The unknown, the secrets, the things he didn't understand, were all coming to the surface. Lila stepped forward, her gaze softening. "Ethan, you're not just a werewolf. You're the key to something much bigger. The balance between the human world and the wolf world. You're the one who can stop Marcus and his pack from destroying us all." Ethan's confusion deepened. "I don't understand. How could I be the key?" Thorn's voice cut through the tension. "Because, Ethan, you're the descendant of the original Silverwood Alpha. You are the heir to the power that started this entire curse." The words hit Ethan like a bolt of lightning. Alpha. Heir. His mind spun, the realization dawning on him like a dark cloud that hung heavy in the air. For the first time since joining the pack, Ethan felt the weight of his lineage, his bloodline. He wasn't just a random victim of the curse. He was part of a legacy, a bloodline tied to the very foundation of the Silverwood Curse. The Alpha had been the first to take on the curse centuries ago, a man who had embraced both the human and wolf within him, ruling over a pack that would grow into the Silverwood pack. But the power of the Alpha was a dangerous thing. It had the ability to control not only the pack but the balance of the entire curse itself. "That's why Marcus is after you," Lila said, her voice tight with emotion. "He knows the prophecy. He knows what you are capable of. And he wants to use you, manipulate you, to get the power of the Alpha for himself." Ethan shook his head, still trying to process the weight of it all. "But I don't even know how to control it. I barely understand the wolf inside me. How am I supposed to fight someone like Marcus? Someone who's been living with this curse for so much longer?" Thorn stepped forward, his face hard, resolute. "Because you have something he doesn't, Ethan. You have the ability to balance the human and wolf sides of you. That is the true power of the Alpha. Marcus has let the wolf take over. He's lost his humanity. But you can control both. That's the power you were born with." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The pressure, the responsibility was suffocating. How could he be the one to stop Marcus? The prophecy, the Alpha bloodline, it all felt too much. Just as the tension reached its peak, the distant sound of footsteps reached their ears. They were moving fast, nearing the clearing. Marcus was coming. "We don't have much time," Lila said, her voice urgent. "Ethan, you have to prepare yourself. You are the pack's only hope now." Thorn nodded. "The Silverwood pack stands with you. But you have to make the choice. You have to accept your role, your destiny, and face Marcus head-on. If you don't, the entire pack will fall." Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing, his heart conflicted. The weight of his bloodline, of his purpose, was more than he had ever imagined. Could he really rise to the challenge? Could he embrace his true power and protect the pack from Marcus and the rogue werewolves? Suddenly, the clearing was bathed in an eerie crimson light as the blood moon began to rise in the sky. The full moon's glow was already intense, but under the blood moon, everything seemed magnified, sharper, more dangerous. It felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. Lila's eyes glinted in the moonlight. "The blood moon is a sign," she said softly. "It marks the beginning of the final battle. The Alpha's true power is strongest during the blood moon. It's time for you to accept who you are." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the wolf stirring inside him once more. But this time it wasn't fear he felt, it was a call. The blood moon, the legacy, the curse, everything was converging. He wasn't just a man caught between two worlds. He was a force. His fists clenched as he faced the pack. His mind was clear now. He was ready to face the truth of who he was. "I'm ready," Ethan said. His voice steady but filled with the weight of his decision. "Let's end this." Lila nodded, and Thorn gave him a hard, approving look. "Then let's make sure Marcus doesn't take what's ours." The forest around them seemed to hold its breath as Ethan stepped forward, his heart beating in time with the thrum of the earth beneath him. The battle was coming, and Ethan would have to face it, not just as a werewolf, but as the Alpha he was destined to be.